I was still weak from surgery, barely able to move, when I heard my daughter's voice beside my hospital bed. She was not praying. She was not worried. She was calmly discussing how long I had left to live and when they could sell my house. In that moment, something inside me shattered. I realized I was no longer seen as a mother, but as a timeline, a problem to manage, an inheritance to divide. Lying there, pretending to be unconscious, I understood that surviving the surgery would be easy compared to surviving my own family's betrayal. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I am 71 years old. I have lived in Charleston, South Carolina for most of my life in a pale yellow house near the Ashley River that my husband and I bought almost 40 years ago. It is an old Southern-style home with wide windows, wooden floors that creak softly at night, and a long front porch where I used to sit with my morning tea. For a long time, I believed that this house and the life inside it would carry me peacefully into old age. I was a high school English teacher for 35 years. I spent my career teaching teenagers how to read carefully, think deeply, and write honestly. When I retired, I thought I had earned the right to a slow and gentle life. I imagined quiet mornings, afternoons in my garden, evenings with books and soft music. For a while, that dream came true. My husband, Thomas, and I built everything together. He worked in construction, and sometimes he would come home tired and dusty, but he always smiled when he saw me waiting at the door. We raised 2 children in this house. We argued, laughed, celebrated birthdays, and survived hard years side by side. When Thomas died of a sudden stroke 8 years ago, I felt as if the walls themselves had cracked. Learning to sleep alone in our bed was the hardest lesson of my life. After he passed, I forced myself to keep moving. I watered my flowers every morning. I walked to the corner bakery on Sundays. I attended church and volunteered at the library. I told myself that loneliness was something strong people learn to manage. Most days, I believed it. My home became my sanctuary. Every room held memories. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the years I baked pies for school fundraisers. The living room shelves were lined with old photo albums and dusty novels. The hallway was marked with faint scratches where my children had once measured their height. This house was not just wood and nails. It was my life, preserved in quiet corners. Rebecca, my daughter, was always ambitious. She worked in real estate and spoke confidently about markets and investments. Andrew, my younger son, struggled more. He changed jobs often and never quite found his footing. Still, I loved them both fiercely. I believed that I had raised them with honesty and kindness. I trusted that, when my time came, they would protect me the way I had protected them. Perhaps that was my greatest mistake. I was never good with paperwork. Numbers confused me. Legal documents made me anxious. Whenever something complicated arrived in the mail, I handed it to Rebecca without question. She was smart. She understood these things. I told myself that was what families were for. My health began to change slowly. At first, it was just fatigue. Then came the dizziness, the shortness of breath, the tight feeling in my chest. My doctor recommended heart surgery and assured me it was routine. I believed him. I believed that I would rest for a few weeks and return to my quiet life. Before the operation, I stood on my porch one evening and watched the river reflect the sunset. The sky was painted in soft pink and gold. I remember thinking how lucky I was. I had a home. I had children. I had memories. I had tomorrow. I did not know that everything was about to change. If you are still watching and starting to feel the quiet tension building, please comment number 1 below to let me know you are with me. Because what happened in that hospital room changed everything, and you are about to hear the moment that broke her heart. Now, let us move on to chapter 2. When I began to wake after the surgery, I did not open my eyes right away. My body felt heavy, as if someone had poured wet cement into my veins. Every breath was slow and shallow. My chest ached, not sharply, but with a deep, dull pressure that reminded me something inside me had been cut and repaired. I could hear sounds before I could understand them. Beeping machines, soft footsteps, distant voices. Everything floated in and out like waves. The room smelled of disinfectant and plastic. Even without seeing it, I knew I was in the recovery unit. I had been in enough hospitals as a teacher visiting sick students to recognize that cold, sterile atmosphere. The air felt too clean, too empty, stripped of anything comforting. I wanted to turn my head, to ask for water, to tell someone I was awake, but my body refused to listen. Then I heard my daughter's voice. Rebecca's voice was clear and calm, the same tone she used when discussing contracts or schedules. It did not sound worried. It did not sound afraid. It sounded practical. "She will not make it much longer," she said quietly. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. The anesthesia was still fading. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I heard Mark respond, lowering his voice even further. He spoke about timing, about how soon they could move forward, about how the market in Charleston was still strong. He mentioned potential buyers who had already shown interest in historic homes near the river. Andrew added something about insurance, about whether everything had been updated, about how complicated things could become if it was not handled properly. They were standing beside my bed, discussing my death as if it were a delayed appointment. I lay there, completely still. My eyelids did not move. My fingers did not twitch. Inside, however, something shattered. I thought about the nights I stayed up sewing Rebecca's costumes for school plays, the mornings I packed Andrew's lunches before sunrise, the years I skipped vacations so I could pay for their textbooks and braces. I remembered sitting in the bleachers clapping until my hands hurt, just to make sure they knew I was proud. And now, here they were, calculating what would remain when I was gone. No one asked if I was in pain. No one wondered if I could hear them. No one reached for my hand. They spoke in careful professional whispers, like coworkers planning a project. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and ask how they could be so cruel, but my body remained trapped. All I could do was listen and remember. At some point, they left the room. I heard the soft click of the door. The silence afterward was almost worse. It pressed against me, thick and suffocating. A nurse came in later and adjusted my blanket. She smiled gently and told me I was doing well. I nodded faintly, though she probably did not notice. My throat felt tight, not from the surgery, but from everything I had just learned. Lying there alone, surrounded by machines, I realized something I had never allowed myself to consider before. To my children, I was no longer just their mother. I was becoming an asset, a responsibility, a problem to be managed. And in that quiet hospital room, I understood that my life was about to change in ways no doctor could predict. If you are still watching and feeling shocked by what she overheard, please comment number 2 below to let me know you are still here. because what her family did next was even more disturbing, and it happened inside her own home. Now, let us move on to Chapter 3. The day I was discharged from the hospital, I expected to feel relief. I imagined stepping back into my living room, sinking into my favorite armchair, and breathing in the familiar scent of lemon polish and old books. I believed that once I crossed my front door, I would begin to heal not only in body, but in spirit. Instead, I felt like a stranger returning to a place that no longer belonged to me. Rebecca drove me home in silence. She kept her eyes on the road, one hand resting tightly on the steering wheel. When we arrived, she rushed ahead to unlock the door, as if I might fall if I waited too long. I noticed immediately that the lock looked different, shiny, new. I told myself it was nothing, probably just another safety improvement. Inside, the house felt wrong. My sofa had been moved closer to the window. The side table beside my chair was gone. A small black camera blinked quietly in the corner of the living room. My stack of unopened mail, which I usually kept near the door, had disappeared. Even the air felt different, as if someone had rearranged more than furniture. Rebecca guided me to the couch and placed a blanket over my legs. She told me she would be staying for a while to take care of me. She said it was only temporary, only until I was stronger. Her voice was gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. I nodded, too tired to protest. In the days that followed, she slowly took control of everything. She organized my medications and kept them in her bedroom. She reminded me when to eat and what to eat. She scheduled my doctor appointments without asking. When I reached for my purse one morning, she gently moved it away and said she would handle errands for now. She said it was for my own good. Mark began stopping by more often. Sometimes he brought coffee. Other times, he arrived with men I had never seen before. They would walk through the house, pointing at windows and whispering near the staircase. When I asked who they were, Rebecca said they were friends, interested in historic architecture. Her answers sounded rehearsed. Andrew visited rarely. When he did, he stayed only long enough to ask how I was feeling before shifting the conversation to money. He mentioned bills, debts, opportunities. He always promised to pay me back. I always believed him. At night, when the house grew quiet, I lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. The soft click of cameras, the low hum of Rebecca's phone charging in the hallway, the distant murmur of late-night phone calls. I felt watched, even when no one was in the room. One afternoon, I went looking for a letter from my bank that I remembered receiving before my surgery. It should have been in the drawer by the kitchen. It was not there. I searched my desk, my bedside table, the cabinet in the hallway. Nothing. When I asked Rebecca about it, she smiled quickly and said she had probably moved it for safekeeping. She promised to find it later. She never did. That was when something inside me shifted. I began to pay attention. I noticed how often my mail was opened before I saw it. How my phone sometimes sat in a different place than I had left it. How conversations stopped when I entered the room. I remembered a lecture I once gave my students about subtle clues in literature, about how small details often revealed the truth. Now, my own life was filled with those details. Sitting alone in my living room, surrounded by furniture that no longer felt like mine, I realized I was no longer simply recovering. I was being managed, controlled, quietly pushed aside. And for the first time since the hospital, I allowed myself to wonder how far my children were willing to go. If you are still watching and realizing how deep the control had already gone, please comment number 3 below to let me know you are following this story, because in the next chapter, she uncovers a document that could have cost her everything. Now, let us move on to chapter 4. After everything I had witnessed and felt in my own home, sleep no longer came easily. Each night, I lay awake listening to the soft hum of electronics and the distant sounds of Rebecca moving through the hallway. I began to notice the patterns I had once ignored. The way she checked my phone when she thought I was not looking, the way she answered calls in hushed tones, the way my mail arrived opened or sometimes did not arrive at all. What once seemed like care now felt like control. I started thinking about the past, about all the times Rebecca had placed papers in front of me and asked me to sign. It had always happened during busy or stressful moments, after doctor appointments, during tax season, when I was tired or distracted. She would smile and say it was just routine, nothing important, only something to keep things simple. I never questioned her. I had raised her. I trusted her. Why would I doubt my own child? But now, doubt was all I had. One afternoon, while Rebecca was out running errands, I sat alone at the kitchen table and stared at my phone for nearly an hour. I had not spoken to Evelyn Parker in more than 15 years, not since Thomas's estate had been settled. Part of me felt embarrassed for needing help. Another part feared what I might discover. Finally, with shaking fingers, I dialed her number. Her voice was calm and familiar. When she heard my name, she sounded surprised and concerned. I told her about my surgery, about the conversation I had overheard in the hospital, about the changes in my house. I did not exaggerate. I did not accuse. I simply told the truth as clearly as I could. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then her tone changed. It became careful, focused, professional. She asked me if I had ever signed a power of attorney, a medical proxy, or a living will. I felt my stomach tighten. I said I was not sure. I remembered signing things, but I could not remember what they were. She asked me to look for my legal documents as soon as possible. That evening, after Rebecca went to bed, I moved slowly down the hallway and into the small office where Thomas used to keep our files. My heart pounded as if I were doing something wrong, even though I was only searching for my own papers. I opened drawers, lifted folders, and flipped through yellowed envelopes. Everything felt out of place. Some files were missing, others had been rearranged. Finally, at the back of the cabinet, I found a thin folder labeled Personal. Inside was a copy of a power of attorney. Rebecca's name was printed clearly beneath the word Agent. The document granted her authority over my finances, my property, and my medical decisions. I stared at the page until the words blurred. At the bottom was my signature. I recognized it, and yet I did not remember signing it. I sat on the floor holding that paper, my hands trembling. Memories returned slowly. A doctor visit, strong medication, Rebecca sitting beside me, papers on a clipboard, her voice telling me it was just for emergencies. I had trusted her. When I called Evelyn back, she explained what it meant. Legally, Rebecca could sell my house, move my money, and make decisions about my treatment without asking me. Everything would be considered valid unless I revoked it. For the first time since my surgery, fear turned into determination. I was not confused. I was not helpless. And I was not finished fighting for my life. If you are still watching and feeling angry about how far they went to manipulate her, please comment number 4 below to let me know you are still with me, because the next confrontation will reveal who her family really is. Now, let us move on to Chapter 5. After discovering the truth hidden inside those legal documents, something inside me changed. I no longer moved through my own house like a frightened guest. I began to watch. I listened more carefully. I paid attention to small details that once would have escaped me. Rebecca's whispered phone calls, Mark's sudden visits, the way they avoided my eyes when money was mentioned. I learned to remain quiet on the outside while gathering strength on the inside. For several days, I said nothing. I observed as Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, tapping numbers into her laptop and speaking softly with real estate agents. I watched Mark walk through the house with strangers, pointing out windows and floors as if I were already gone. Each moment added another layer to the truth I had been trying to avoid. One afternoon, I overheard Rebecca speaking in the hallway about timing and paperwork being ready. Mark answered that everything was prepared when the moment came. Their words were calm and confident. There was no hesitation, no guilt. That was when I knew I could no longer pretend. I asked Rebecca to sit with me in the living room. My voice was steady, though my hands were trembling. I told her that I had found the power of attorney. I asked her why she had never explained it to me. I asked her why she was talking about selling my home while I was still alive. Her face changed instantly. The warmth disappeared, replaced by impatience. She laughed softly and said I was misunderstanding everything. She blamed my medication. She suggested that stress and fear were affecting my memory. She spoke slowly, as if I were a confused child. Mark stepped in before I could respond. He told me I was overreacting. He said I did not understand how finances worked anymore. He reminded me that times had changed and that young people knew how to manage things better. He spoke kindly, but his words carried dismissal. Andrew arrived later that evening. I hoped, foolishly, that he might stand beside me. Instead, he asked if everything was all right with the accounts. He asked whether I had made any changes that might affect everyone. His concern was not for me, but for what he might lose. Listening to them, I felt something tear inside my chest that had nothing to do with surgery. I remembered teaching them to ride bicycles. I remembered holding them during fevers. I remembered working late nights to pay their tuition. None of that mattered now. I realized then that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan. They had discussed it, prepared for it, justified it to themselves. In their minds, I had already begun to disappear. I stood up slowly and walked back to my bedroom. My legs were weak, but my thoughts were clearer than they had been in years. Behind me, I could hear their voices lowering, shifting into urgent whispers. They were already adjusting their strategy. That night, lying in bed, I thought about my doctors, about how quickly they had accepted Rebecca's version of my condition, about how often Mark had been present during appointments. A quiet suspicion formed, one that unsettled me deeply. I was surrounded by people who claimed to love me, and yet I had never felt more alone. But I was no longer blind, and I was no longer willing to surrender my life to those who saw me only as an opportunity. After the confrontation in the living room, I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not beg for understanding. Instead, I became quiet in a way I had never been before. The pain was still there, sitting heavy in my chest, but it no longer controlled me. It sharpened my thoughts. It forced me to see clearly. I understood that if I reacted emotionally, I would lose. If I acted carefully, I might survive with my dignity intact. So I began to pretend. I let Rebecca believe that her words had confused me. I acted unsure. I asked simple questions. I apologized when I forgot things. I allowed her to take charge of small decisions. To her, I became the fragile, obedient mother she expected. To myself, I became a woman preparing for battle. Whenever I could, I listened. I kept my phone close and learned how to record conversations without being noticed. I saved text messages and copied emails to a private account Evelyn helped me create. I photographed documents when Rebecca left them on the counter. I wrote down dates, times, and names in a small notebook I hid inside an old dictionary. Every detail mattered. Evelyn and I met quietly in her office on a Tuesday morning when Rebecca believed I was at a physical therapy appointment. Sitting across from her desk, I laid out everything I had collected. She reviewed each piece carefully, explaining what was useful and what was not. She never rushed me. She treated me like a capable adult, not a burden. That alone restored something inside me. Together, we began to rebuild my life on paper. The first step was revoking the power of attorney. Evelyn prepared the legal documents and filed them with the county. We notified my bank, my financial advisor, and my medical providers. Any authority Rebecca had over my affairs was removed. She could no longer speak for me. She could no longer act for me. Next, we updated my medical proxy and living will. I chose independent professionals instead of family members. My health decisions would be mine again. Then we created a trust. Evelyn explained how a family trust could protect my home, my savings, and my investments. Everything was transferred into it. A neutral trustee was appointed. I no longer stood alone against my own children. The law stood beside me. For my will, I made the hardest decision of my life. I named Claire as my primary beneficiary. She had never asked me for money. She called just to hear my voice. She sent handwritten cards. She remembered my favorite flowers. In a family full of noise and demands, she offered quiet presence. That mattered more than blood. At home, the atmosphere shifted. Rebecca began watching me more closely. Mark asked casual questions about appointments and paperwork. Andrew stopped mentioning money and started mentioning family unity. They sensed something was changing, even if they could not see it yet. At night, fear sometimes returned. I worried about being discovered. I worried about retaliation. I worried about whether I was strong enough to finish what I had started. But each morning when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman who had finally chosen herself. For the first time in years, my life belonged to me again, and I was ready to face whatever came next. If you are still watching and impressed by how she secretly took back control, please comment number 6 below to let me know you are still here. Because once her family realizes what she has done, everything begins to fall apart. Now let us move on to chapter 7. The first sign that my quiet resistance had succeeded came in the form of official letters. Thick envelopes arrived from my bank, from my medical providers, and from Evelyn's office. Each one confirmed that the legal changes were now in effect. My accounts had been secured, my medical authority had been reassigned, my trust had been activated. On paper, my life was finally mine again. In reality, it meant that a storm was about to break inside my family. Rebecca noticed first. One morning, she burst into the kitchen holding her phone, her face pale and tight. She had just learned that her access to my accounts had been revoked. She paced back and forth, sending messages, making calls, demanding explanations from anyone who would listen. She tried to sound calm when she spoke to me, but her voice trembled with anger and panic. I listened quietly and said nothing. Mark's world began to unravel soon after. Several of his business deals were suddenly frozen. Investors withdrew. Buyers hesitated. Questions were raised about documents he had submitted. Without my authorization, his plans collapsed. He stopped visiting as often. When he did, he looked exhausted and distracted, as if he were constantly calculating his next move. Andrew felt the change in a different way. The steady flow of money he had grown used to disappear overnight. His messages became shorter. His visits became rare. For the first time in years, he had to manage his own expenses. He struggled. I knew he did. Part of me wanted to help. Another part knew that helping him now would only continue the cycle. Then the lawyers became involved. My bank launched a formal review of the mortgage documents connected to my home. The suspicious signatures and irregular transfers raised red flags. Evelyn sent warning letters to Rebecca and Mark, outlining potential legal consequences if further interference occurred. Suddenly, what had once been a private family matter became a legal one. The community noticed. At church, people lowered their voices when I passed. Neighbors stopped me to ask gentle, awkward questions. Friends from my teaching days called to check on me. Word traveled quickly in a small city like Charleston. Rebecca, who once enjoyed admiration for her success, now avoided public gatherings. Shame followed her everywhere. At home, silence settled in. No more shared meals, no more casual conversations, no more laughter in the evenings. Rebecca spent most of her time in her room or away from the house. Andrew stopped coming by altogether. Mark vanished from my life completely. The house felt larger, emptier, and colder than it ever had after Thomas died. I was alone again. Some nights, the loneliness pressed down on me so heavily that I could barely breathe. I missed my children. I missed the illusion of family. I questioned myself. Had I gone too far? Had I destroyed something that could have been repaired? Guilt crept into my thoughts when I was tired and weak. But every time doubt appeared, I remembered the hospital room. I remembered their voices. I remembered how easily they had accepted my disappearance. One afternoon, Claire called me. Her voice was hesitant, careful. She told me something she had never shared before. Months earlier, she had overheard Rebecca speaking to a business partner. Rebecca had laughed and said that everything would be easier if I did not last much longer. At the time, Claire had been shocked but unsure what to do. Now she felt I deserved to know. I sat in my chair, staring at the window, unable to leave. The words echoed in my mind. They confirmed what I had feared but tried not to believe. This was never just about money. It was about impatience, about convenience, about removing an obstacle. That night, I made another decision. I increased security around my finances. I updated my medical records again. I arranged for independent advocates to monitor my care. I refused to leave anything to chance. My family had chosen their path. Now, I would choose mine. Leaving Charleston was not an easy decision. That city held nearly every chapter of my adult life. It was where I had fallen in love, raised my children, buried my husband, and believed I would grow old in peace. Yet after everything that had happened, its streets no longer felt comforting. Every corner reminded me of betrayal and disappointment. Staying there meant reopening wounds that were still trying to heal. With Evelyn's guidance and Claire's quiet encouragement, I chose to spend most of my time in Savannah, Georgia. Claire lived in a small apartment near the river, in a neighborhood filled with oak trees and soft coastal light. The slower pace suited me. It felt like a place where I could breathe again. Packing my belongings was both painful and freeing. I sorted through decades of memories, old photo albums, Thomas's work gloves, my teaching certificates, handwritten notes from former students. Some items I kept, others I donated or stored away. Each object carried a story, and letting go felt like closing certain doors forever. Still, with every box I sealed, I felt lighter. When I arrived in Savannah, Claire welcomed me with quiet warmth. She had prepared a small guest room with fresh curtains and flowers on the windowsill. She never made me feel like a burden. Instead, she treated me as a respected presence in her life. We developed gentle routines, morning walks along the river, grocery shopping on Saturdays, simple dinners in the evening. These ordinary moments became anchors for my healing. My health improved steadily. I enrolled in a cardiac rehabilitation program and attended sessions 3 times a week. The exercises were slow and careful, but each week I felt stronger. I practiced gentle stretching and learned how to listen to my body again. My doctors reduced my medications gradually. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without fear. I also began building a new social world. Claire encouraged me to attend a local women's group for seniors. At first, I was nervous. I worried that I had forgotten how to connect with strangers, but the women welcomed me with kindness. We shared stories, recipes, and laughter. I joined a book club and a memoir writing workshop. Surrounded by others who had faced loss and reinvention, I realized I was not alone in starting over. Writing became my refuge. Each afternoon, I sat by the window with a notebook and recorded fragments of my life. Memories of Thomas's gentle humor, stories from my classroom, moments of motherhood, both joyful and painful. I wrote about betrayal without bitterness and about forgiveness without excuses. The words helped me organize my thoughts and release emotions I had carried silently for years. As I reflected, my anger slowly faded. It did not disappear entirely, but it softened. I learned that forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant refusing to let resentment control my remaining years. I accepted that my children had made their choices. I did not excuse them. I simply stopped allowing their actions to define me. My bond with Claire deepened. We talked late into the night about her dreams, her fears, her hopes for the future. I shared lessons I had learned too late in life, about boundaries, about self-respect, about courage. She listened with sincerity that reminded me of the best parts of motherhood. One evening, as we watched the sunset over the river, I realized something important. I was not merely surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole again. If you are still watching and feeling inspired by how she rebuilt her life, please comment number 8 below to let me know you are staying until the end. Because what happens next will finally reveal whether justice and peace were truly possible for her. Now, let us move on to the final chapter. By the time the legal process reached its conclusion, I had already learned how to live without constant fear. Life in Savannah had given me space to breathe, to think, and to regain trust in myself. Still, when Evelyn called to say that everything was finally settled, my hands trembled as I held the phone. No matter how strong I had become, part of me was still the mother who wanted her family to be whole. The investigation had taken months. Bank records were examined, documents were reviewed, experts analyzed signatures and timelines. Every detail I had collected became part of a larger picture. In the end, the truth could no longer be denied. The court ruled that my power of attorney had been abused. Several financial transactions were declared invalid. The unauthorized mortgage on my home was canceled. Rebecca was ordered to repay damages and was restricted from managing anyone's finances in the future. I felt no triumph when I heard the verdict, only relief. Mark's professional life collapsed soon afterward. Clients withdrew their support. His reputation suffered irreparable damage. Real estate agencies quietly distanced themselves from him. The man who once walked confidently through my home now avoided my name entirely. His ambition had consumed him, and it left nothing behind. Andrew reached out next. He sent a long message, filled with apologies and regret. He admitted that he had been selfish and afraid. He confessed that he had followed Rebecca's lead because it was easier than standing alone. After weeks of hesitation, I agreed to meet him at a small cafe near the river. He looked thinner than I remembered, older. We sat across from each other in silence before he finally spoke. His words were clumsy but sincere. He asked for forgiveness. He promised to change. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him that I loved him, but love did not erase consequences. I was willing to rebuild our relationship slowly, with honesty and distance from money. There would be no shared accounts, no hidden arrangements, no dependency. If he wanted to be part of my life, it would be as my son, not my beneficiary. He nodded. For the first time in years, he seemed to understand. Rebecca never asked for a meeting. Instead, she sent a brief email. She apologized for hurting me. She admitted to making serious mistakes. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not explain herself. I sensed that shame and fear still ruled her choices. I replied politely and wished her well. Nothing more. Some relationships, I had learned, could not be restored. With Evelyn's help, I reviewed my will and trust one final time. Every clause was clear, every responsibility defined. Claire remained my primary beneficiary. An independent trustee would manage everything. My wishes were protected beyond my lifetime. For the first time, I felt secure about the future. Emotionally, something shifted inside me. The anger that once burned in my chest faded into quiet understanding. I no longer replayed old conversations in my mind. I no longer imagined different endings. What happened had happened. It did not define me. One afternoon, sitting on my balcony overlooking the river, I reflected on the journey I had taken, from fear to awareness, from betrayal to strength, from silence to self-respect. I had not won a battle. I had reclaimed my life, and that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. Time has a quiet way of reshaping everything. It does not announce its work. It does not ask for permission. It simply moves forward, smoothing sharp edges and softening heavy memories. In the months after my legal battles ended, I settled into a life that no longer revolved around fear, suspicion, or survival. In Savannah, my days unfolded gently, guided by sunlight through wide windows and the slow rhythm of the river outside my balcony. Each morning, I woke without dread. I brewed my coffee, opened my notebook, and sat by the glass doors watching boats drift past. The woman who once lay helpless in a hospital bed felt like someone I had known in another lifetime, yet I never forgot her. She reminded me of how easily trust could become a weakness when it was offered without boundaries. Sometimes, I returned in my thoughts to that recovery room, to the beeping machines, to the voices that spoke of my death as if it were a business arrangement. For a long time, those memories haunted me. Now, they served as markers of transformation. They were proof that I had survived not only illness, but betrayal. Before everything changed, I believed that being a good mother meant sacrificing endlessly. It meant staying silent when I felt hurt. It meant accepting disappointment as part of love. I confused endurance with virtue. I thought strength meant absorbing pain quietly. Only later did I understand that real strength meant protecting my dignity, even when doing so broke familiar bonds. My relationship with Andrew has slowly begun to rebuild itself. We speak occasionally. Our conversations are careful and honest. He tells me about his work and his struggles. I listen without judgment, but also without illusions. There are boundaries now, clear and unbreakable. Money is never discussed. Control is never shared. We are learning, slowly, how to be mother and son again, without expectations that poison affection. Rebecca remains distant. We exchange holiday messages, polite, brief, respectful. The closeness we once shared may never return, and I have learned to accept that. Some bridges cannot be rebuilt after they collapse. Grief for that loss still visits me sometimes, quietly, without warning, but it no longer rules me. In contrast, my bond with Claire has grown into something profound and steady. She does not see me as fragile or burdensome. She sees me as a woman with history, wisdom, and value. We read together. We cook together. We share stories late into the night. I watch her navigate adulthood with integrity and courage, and I feel hope rather than regret. Through her, I have learned that legacy is not something written in legal documents alone. For years, I believed that my greatest inheritance would be my house, my savings, my carefully arranged estate. Now I know that these things are only tools. What truly lasts are the lessons we pass on, the example we set, the way we teach others to treat themselves. My legacy is not measured in dollars. It is measured in self-respect. It is measured in courage. It is measured in the moment I chose not to disappear quietly for someone else's convenience. To anyone who finds themselves in a similar place, especially those who have spent their lives putting others first, I offer this truth. Love does not require surrendering your autonomy. Family does not entitle anyone to your silence. Age does not erase your right to decide how your life is lived. Protect your voice. Protect your boundaries. Protect your worth. Growing older does not mean growing smaller. It means growing clearer. On quiet evenings, I sit on my balcony as the sun lowers itself into the river, painting the water with gold and rose. Claire often sits beside me, reading or writing. Sometimes we speak, sometimes we do not. Silence between us is comfortable, not empty. It is filled with trust. I often think of Thomas in these moments. I imagine him smiling, proud that I found my way back to myself. I imagine him telling me gently that I did well, and I believe him. My story did not end in betrayal. It ended in awakening. I chose myself, and that choice became the greatest legacy I could ever leave behind. Life has a way of revealing what truly matters when we are brave enough to listen. Sometimes, the deepest wounds do not come from strangers, but from those we trusted most. Yet even in betrayal, there is an opportunity for awakening. Strength is not found in holding on to what hurts us, but in choosing self-respect, clarity, and courage. True legacy is not built on possessions or documents, but on integrity, boundaries, and the quiet decision to honor one's own worth. Growing older does not mean becoming invisible. It means becoming wiser, more grounded, and more certain of who we are. When we stop living for approval and start living with intention, we reclaim our power. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments, like the video, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Your support truly matters.